Hello. All right. So, hey, Jacob. I've logged in just a few minutes early, and we'll wait. Yeah, it looks bad, doesn't it? Starting to grow back. I say 2 weeks. We'll be back. I'm sorry. I'm sure that I'm going to get interrupted at some point because we just put the kids down. So one of them will probably wander in at some point. So I'm going to give everyone a few minutes. I'm looking through to see who has yet to submit the vocab quiz, and there's quite a few people. So I might ask y'all to contact some of these individuals if you know them and see if they're having issues. For instance, Kimball hasn't submitted yet, so if you've got Kimball's number, text him and ask him what's going on there. I'm on another screen. I'm looking at who needs to submit these. Did I say that last night? It's possible. Hopefully I didn't sound too angry at my kids. I wasn't that mad. What? There's a little bit in the bottom. All right, so how was you guys' day today? Did you enjoy not going to school again? It's actually kind of driving me crazy. It's been doing work. So the question is, do you have more or less work? Homework all day. I guess at this point, all of your work is homework, right? Somehow more. You slept all day. Oh, well, welcome tonight. You can get some stuff done tonight. Natasha, I've been watching Parks and Rec as well. Not today, but I've been watching it at night sometimes. But because I'm an adult and I have responsibilities, I have to wake up early still. Okay. So, anyway, okay. So we get up and then we do kids' school because I have little kids. So I've had Fiona watching Mankind, the story of all of us, as her history assignment. She likes it though, so it's kind of exciting. She has lots of questions. Good night, Daddy. Good night. You want to say hello to everyone?
Hey! Good night.
Good night. Sit tight.
Good night, Mommy. Good night.
So if you're just joining us, I'm just waiting for everybody to join in before I get started. I don't want to jump into a bunch of stuff and then have to start over because we only had a few people in. So at this point, what I'm realizing is uh, maybe I should just quit teaching and become a professional YouTuber. I would need a camera, so first hurdle to get over is that, and then I guess you need someone to follow you around and film what you do. So, any volunteers? Today that would have been. Let's see, what did I do today? Today went hiking in the woods. Answered an absolute ridiculous amount of emails. The amount of emails that have been coming out is kind of insane. I've probably spent an hour today just fixing people's quizzes on Schoology who have accidentally logged out or messed up or something like that. It's just like every 5 minutes or so I'm fixing something like that, which is fine. And then I made some jerky. I'm working on that. That's in the fridge now. So because I ordered a dehydrator, why did I order a dehydrator? I don't know. It seemed like the thing to do. So tomorrow I will be making jerky. It's deer jerky. I should probably log into this a minute later so that I'm not just sitting here talking. It's a great idea, Chris. Dried apples. Yeah, I might have to try that. I've got some apples, and I also have the dehydrator, so it seems kind of natural. But we're going to do the jerky first. I also kind of like just, regular old apples. Like, I have good apples right now, so I don't know if I want to waste them on that. I feel like I need to get lousy Red Delicious apples to dry. Who likes Red Delicious apples? They're the worst. They don't have any crunch, and they're kind of mealy. Interesting way to spell venison there, Reese. Yeah, I think so. I'm not a fan at all of that type of apple. So, are any of your other classes doing any type of video stuff like this? How are they operating things? I'm curious. Oh, Reem, I saw that you had started your quiz, but it wasn't right, or not right. It wasn't. Excuse me. It wasn't that it was right. It just wasn't finished. So I cleared it out because it looked like there was an issue there. So if you had done it, it didn't register the score. So you're going to want to go in and double check on that. Bets is going to do a Zoom Friday. Okay. Just keep posting stuff on Canvas and School, video stuff. All right. Cool. Yeah, I'm curious how the Zoom thing will work. It's like a conference call, right? How many college students are going to get? Yeah, who knows? Is Abby home, Jacob? She's at work. But she's home from college, so college is out. Yeah. So fortunately, we went to Costco 2 weekends ago, and we just went as a regular Costco trip, like not really doing the whole coronavirus hoarding thing. We just so happened to be out of toilet paper, so we got a huge thing of toilet paper. And that's turned out to be a very good purchase, because I went to the grocery store today and there was nothing anywhere. Oh, and let me tell you something about my grocery store experience today. You know, the people that are supposed to get sick from this thing and die or whatever are the old people, right? Literally, I didn't see a person at the grocery store under the age of 75. Like everybody there was old, and they weren't doing anything important. They were buying stuff like potato chips and Diet Mountain Dew. Like I don't understand it. It was kind of annoying to see that many old people out and about, because I'm like, you're really willing to, you know, make this problem worse. All right, I'm going to get started in a minute. Sounds like me grandfather. When you type me instead of my, it makes you sound Irish immediately. Looks like we're going to have a lot less people tonight. Hopefully some more will join in. Maybe they just realize it's easier to watch the video after the fact. But yeah, I'm going to start. I'm going to start right now. So let's get started. So the start point of this video is going to be 12 minutes and 30 seconds. They might think it's 8:15. I guess that's a good point. They might think it's 8:15. Maybe let me just throw a post up saying that I'm live now, and see if some other people join in. I just bumped it up so that we could get finished earlier, because I didn't want people having to stay up real late. And what's going on here? Hey, Zainab. And now Schoology's not working, so let's try logging in again. Okay, here we go. And I'm going to post right now. I'm live now. Post. All right. So now some people are joining in. The internet is infected. That's not good. Put bacon in. Hey, Alex. How's it going? Alex, did you do your quiz? Because earlier today you had not. Make sure that you do it. Not right now, but after we're done. Let me just jump in here and see who needs to do it. My quiz is way shorter than other stuff, and I know it's shorter because you get cut off after 10 minutes. So how many hats do I own? 2. Literally 2. This one and the one I wore last night. Oh, and the fire hat that I wore at the beginning of the video. It kicked you when you had 3 questions left. I can go in and give you another attempt at that. Oh no, it kicked you. Oh, because of the time limit. Oh, okay. Did I make it a 10-minute time limit, or was it 15 minutes? You should get it. This is an Nat Geo hat, see? Or are you making fun of me? Um, so there's an interesting thing, and I'm curious about it. It's thank you, Reem. I couldn't tell. There's an account in Schoology called "Ignore This Account," and I don't know what that is. It has me confused. They took the quiz and answered one question. So if you have any information about that, then let me know. Oh yeah, 15 minutes to take this quiz. All right. Okay. No, Adam, you should definitely just go ahead and listen in, because we're going to have good information. You can go back and catch up on the other stuff in a little bit. I hope you're feeling better quickly. Hopefully you don't have to go get tested for the nasty stuff. That would not be good. All right. So we are going to take a look at the war in the Pacific tonight. And oh, it's you since you created 2 accounts. Okay. All right, I got it, Xander. Yeah, just next time, just let me know, and I'll delete the delete your attempt. I actually emailed Cash today and asking if that was him, because apparently Cash is supposed to join Schoology to make sure that I'm doing stuff while we're out, because that's his job as my boss. So I emailed him. I was like, "Are you ignore this account?" And he was so confused. So anyway, all right. So let's get started. War in the Pacific. I'll set up a little bit here. Okay, so the war in the Pacific, we're really taking a look at Japan, and the I gotta stop reading comments. And so Japan begins its expansionary process earlier than Germany does. Japan is expanding, really in the age of imperialism. I mean, Japan. When we look at World War II Japan, it's really just a continuation of what they were doing during World War I, and even in the time period before that. So we can actually take this back all the way to the early 1900s, even the late 1800s. So if you kind of remember correctly, Japan was under the Tokugawa shogunate up until the 1850s, and then the United States came in. Commodore Matthew Perry sailed ships into the harbor in Japan and forced them to open the country, right? And this was the wake-up call for Japan to industrialize. They were like, wow, we just got forced open against our will, and now if we're going to survive in this new industrialized world, we're going to need to figure out how to industrialize on our own. And so Japan begins the process of industrialization, and they industrialize extremely rapidly. The government, so the Tokugawa shogunate is overturned, or not overturned, but they're overthrown. And you have the restoration of the emperor. We call that the Meiji Restoration, right? And so the Meiji Restoration takes place, and this is when we see Japan begin to westernize. The samurai become the new business leaders, etc. And we very rapidly see Japan turning into a sort of an imperial and industrial powerhouse. And by the 1900s, they've increased their capacity for economics so much that they have reached the same level as many of the European countries. And when Europe really realizes this is in 1905. In 1905, the Japanese have colonized Korea, and Russia begins to push through parts of China. And basically, you have both Japan and Russia pushing into China to gain more territory before China is being divided up. This is during the end of the Qing dynasty. This is right before the Boxer Rebellion. So just kind of connecting all of these ideas. And Japan and Russia end up coming into conflict with one another, not with China. They're coming into conflict over the territory in China. Um, but this war that takes place between Japan and Russia is called the Russo-Japanese War, and the Japanese win it. And when they beat Russia in this war, it kind of becomes the realization for most of Europe and the United States that holy smokes, Japan is a legit power now. They just defeated Russia in battle, a European country. And so Japan is increasingly growing in this. And their win over Russia during the Russo-Japanese War basically opened the door for them to take even more territory in the Pacific Ocean. And so during the course of World War One, Japan looked at the map around them and they realized that a lot of the territories in the Pacific Ocean, a lot of the islands in the Pacific Ocean, were German colonies. And so they joined Britain, and Britain had helped them during the Russo-Japanese War as well. So there were good relationships between Britain and Japan, at least kind of good relationships. I wouldn't say that they were chummy, but they had helped each other before. And so Japan joins the Allied side during World War II and helps the Allies fight against Germany. Now, what is Japan's goal in all this? They basically just want to take all of those former German colonies and turn them into Japanese colonies, which is exactly what they do. So during the course of all this, the Japanese gained quite a bit of territory during the course of World War One, and they're not invited to the Treaty of Versailles, though, which insults the Japanese people. They're not happy about that either. And so Japan is continuing its process of imperialism and militarism throughout the 1920s. Now, Japan was hurt pretty badly by the Great Depression. And one of the solutions for the Japanese government was to further expand and imperialize other territories so that they could gain more resources and increase production. So one of the things about Japan is that geographically speaking, they do not have a lot of natural resources. Japan is a volcanic island chain. So there's a lot of mountains. There's not a ton of farmland. They do have some natural resources like silver, for instance, but as far as large scale quantities of coal, iron ore, that kind of stuff, and then also just grain to feed people, Japan is not anywhere on the same level as an area like China. And so China kind of became the target for Japanese imperialism. And by 1931, Japan is going to completely take Manchuria, which is the northeastern section of China. And they do this in order to extract resources from China. And so, when we talked about China in class, I talked about how World War II comes to China early. And this is an example of that. By 1937, Japan launches a full-scale invasion of China. And the most famous incident from this invasion is the rape of Nanking. And that's basically where the Japanese came into one of the most populated cities in China and killed and raped and tortured and maimed the general population. And it's actually kind of insane how much damage they did in this area. If you look, I would actually encourage you to Google this if you're interested, because it's a fantastic example of the cruelty that the Japanese showed the Chinese during World War II. And if you haven't already watched The Civilians at War, I was getting ready to say it's in the documentaries. Jacob. So if you haven't already watched the Civilians at War documentary, you need to make sure you do that. And they cover this. I believe they may interview one of the Japanese soldiers in that, and he sort of explains the whole, just the cold-blooded calculation, I guess, of just killing people without any thought I think he says that he viewed them as rats, which is kind of crazy to hear a person say. And so this kind of shows the brutality of the Japanese as they begin to conquer all of these areas in the Pacific Ocean. Now, what Japan says that they're trying to do is to create the greater East Asian co-prosperity sphere. Basically, their idea was is that we need to take all of these territories that have been controlled by European powers and put them under Asian control, under Japanese control. And that's what they do. They very rapidly take over all of the European colonies and institute Japanese control of those colonies. So, for instance, French Indochina is going to go under Japanese control. The Dutch East Indies are going to go under Japanese control. The British colonies of Singapore and Malaysia are going to go under British control. And the American colony of the Philippines are going to come under American control. Come under Japanese control. There's actually a really, really famous incident where the American soldiers in the Philippines are rounded up and captured by the Japanese and forced on what's referred to as the Bataan Death March. And the Japanese instituted death marches all over the places that they captured, but this is a really famous example here in the United States because of the impact on American soldiers. And basically they just forced them to march continuously and shot people that didn't. They were not allowed to stop for food and water and that kind of things. And there was an American general on the island, on the Philippines at the time, named Douglas MacArthur. And MacArthur very, very famously pledges to return to the Philippines when he gets on his boat to leave after the Americans have surrendered in the Philippines and the Japanese have taken control. And the Filipino people themselves had not really, American rule had not been good for the Filipino people, but Japanese rule wasn't much better either. And so the Filipino people had sort of gone from one imperial power to another. They were under Spanish control, and then they fell under American control after the Spanish-American War. And then they came under Japanese control for a while. And so you would think that the Japanese would sort of be trying to create a new image, I guess, of imperialism to come across as as better than the European masters were, but the Japanese as masters were even crueler in some cases than the Europeans were. And so this is another example of just straight up imperialism and sort of the Japanese belief of racial superiority over other Asian groups of people as well. But Japan is rapidly, I mean, it's just like Hitler's expansion in Europe. He very rapidly takes control of Europe, and the Japanese very rapidly take control of the Pacific. And by 1941, Japan has no real threats to their safety in the Pacific, with the exception of the United States. The United States is the only thing that sort of stands between Japan and, basically being the masters of the Eastern Hemisphere. And so the Japanese come up with this plan to destroy the American Navy before it has the chance to mobilize against them in any way. So America's still neutral in 1941. They have not joined a specific side. However, they are supporting the Allied powers during the war. There are several different things that you learn about in your U.S. history class, like the Lend-Lease Act and cash and carry and all that stuff, to send weapons to the Allied powers. So Japan realizes that if America joins the war, they're not going to join on the side of the Japanese and the Germans. But Japan basically is saying, you know what, we need to get rid of this threat before it becomes a real threat. And that's really the logic behind the Pearl Harbor attack. It's basically the idea that you can kill the United States before they have a chance to become a real threat. And there was some logic to this as well. So a lot of times it's easy for students to just think, man, what a dumb thing to do, attack Pearl Harbor. Why would you do that? That's going to make the United States join the war. Of course, it did do that. But basically what the Japanese were thinking is that if we can make the United States join the war before they're ready, and we can destroy their navy in the process, then it'll take them forever to be able to come to capacity and be able to challenge us. And so the logic here is not terrible, but there are a couple things that ended up working against the Japanese. So the Pearl Harbor attack was a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Pearl Harbor in Hawaii was the base of the U.S. Navy during this time period, and pretty much the entire Pacific Fleet, the entire U.S. Pacific Fleet, was in Pearl Harbor at the time. So if you were trying to destroy, half of the United States force, then this was a good strategy because they were all there. Maybe it wasn't the best idea to have all of the ships in the same harbor, but that's um, the situation. And so, but there were two things that kind of worked in the favor of the United States here. The first is that on December 7th of 1941, which was a Sunday morning, and when the Japanese Zeros, that was the planes they flew in and bombed the harbor didn't have any of the aircraft carriers in it. The aircraft carriers were actually out on a training drill that day. And I don't remember the exact reason why they were out on a training drill, but because the aircraft carriers weren't there, the United States didn't lose any aircraft carriers. Now, we did lose a lot of battleships, but and while that was not a good thing, and a lot of people died, and Pearl Harbor was a terrible day in U.S. history. In fact, it's one of the most famous dates. December 7th, 1941 is one of the most famous dates in all of U.S. history. But the fact that the aircraft carriers weren't destroyed was a big deal because aircraft carriers ended up being a much, much bigger player in the warfare during World War II than battleships did. Battleships were really kind of a World War I style weapon and were basically outdated by the time World War II came up. And so the importance of battleships versus aircraft carriers, the ships that the U.S. Navy lost were not the most important ships to lose. And then the other thing working in the U.S. favor, and the Japanese really underestimated, was the ability and the strength of the U.S. economy to rapidly rebuild what was lost and actually overexceed that and produce more ships at an incredibly rapid rate. The United States was the number one economy in the world at the start of World War II, and it actually just accelerated even further as a number one economy in the years after. So the ability to produce more ships rapidly and to shift the economy from a peacetime economy to a wartime economy was a really big deal for that. And so Pearl Harbor brings the United States into the war, and the U.S. is going to be fighting a two-front war throughout. And yesterday we kind of covered the entrance of the United States into North Africa and then D-Day in Europe. But in the Pacific Ocean, the United States was even more involved because they were the only force fighting against the Japanese for the most part, unless you count, the Australians were helping out in the Pacific as well, Australians and New Zealanders. But the United States, of course, is the big force. And so the U.S. strategy after Pearl Harbor became to push the Japanese out of all of these islands that they had conquered all across the Pacific Ocean. And so if you're thinking about sort of what the Pacific Ocean looks like, if you've got a little map you could pull up on Google or something, what you would see is that the Pacific Ocean and the South Pacific in particular is just full of tiny little islands. And all of those islands had been taken by the Japanese, and airstrips had been placed on those islands, and everything is basically being used to defend Japan. And so invading Japan directly was not really an option for the U.S. because just to get close enough. So if you let's say that the United States wanted to send in troops to invade Japan, they couldn't get the ships close enough to Japan because of all of the fortresses basically on these small islands that it basically acted as a series of fortresses guarding the mainland, the Japanese mainland. And so, what ends up happening is the United States launches a strategy known as island hopping. Sometimes people call it leapfrogging, but basically the idea is you have all these little islands, and the U.S. government's going to take this island, and then they're going to leapfrog to the next island and take it, or island hop to the next island and take it, and so on and so forth. And so they're going to be taking these islands and moving across the Pacific Ocean slowly, and moving closer and closer to Japan as they go. Now, the most important one of these leapfrogging islands is what we usually refer to the turning point of World War II in the Pacific is the Battle of Midway. Now, Midway Island is a small island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's called Midway because it's literally about midway across the Pacific Ocean. And it's an easy way to think of the turning point of the war because it's midway to the end of the war. But this is the war where, or this is the point in the war where the United States really gets the Japanese moving backwards. And so from this point on, the United States is winning battles as they push Japan closer and closer to the homeland, to Japan itself. And at this in the Battle of Midway is an aircraft carrier battle. I mentioned how important aircraft carriers were. Basically, battles in the Pacific begin to be measured based off of who wins, or excuse me, who loses more aircraft carriers. If you lost more aircraft carriers, then you lost the battle. And aircraft carriers are becoming the way that warfare is conducted. And one of the reasons taking little islands and setting up airstrips on those islands was so valuable is because you can't sink an island. And so they actually were given the term unsinkable aircraft carriers. And so there's all these, like, if you were to take a look at that map, if it's a modern map, you'd see a lot of these territories still to this day are connected to the United States in some way. They're protectorates, et cetera. And that's from this campaign, this movement across the Pacific Ocean. So places like, Guam, and Wake Island, and the American Samoas, and the American Marianas, all these little islands were taken by the United States during this time period. So anyway, that's what's going on in the course of the island hopping campaign. Now, as the United States gets closer and closer to Japan, as the United States gets closer and closer to Japan, the Japanese continue to get more and more desperate. And as they get more and more desperate, they begin to rely on tactics that are scarier. For instance, kamikaze pilots are employed. A kamikaze pilot was a suicide pilot, and this is in the time period before guided missiles. And so this kamikaze pilot was a guided missile. Basically, a Japanese pilot would be in the plane, and he would, fly his airplane into the ships. And if you remember all the way back to when we talked about the Mongol invasions, I mentioned that the Mongols attempted to invade Japan, and the Japanese were saved by the fact that a typhoon hit and sunk most of the Mongol ships, and that typhoon was called the kamikaze, or the divine wind. Kamis are Japanese god spirits in Shintoism. And so calling these planes kamikaze is basically a reference to that divine wind that saved the Japanese from Mongol invasion. And now these airplanes are going to be the things that save the the Japanese from American invasion. And once again, in that documentary, you can kind of see the absolute doggedness that the Japanese fight with on the way out, and the idea that the Japanese government has a lot of propaganda that paints the Americans as they were going to cannibalize the Japanese people if they took over, and so you actually have Japanese citizens committing suicide as opposed to being captured by the U.S. Army or having any contact with the U.S. Army. And so Japan is absolutely dogged when it comes to not giving up and not surrendering during this war. And the prospect of invading Japan itself was extremely frightening from the United States perspective because of the sheer loss of life that was going to take. One of the last, two of the last major campaigns, before both of those campaigns were unbelievably bloody and killed a ton of soldiers on both sides of the conflict were killed in these conflicts, and it was concerning, very concerning to the American public what an actual invasion of Japan would look like, because the Japanese were not willing to surrender. They were going to fight to the last man. And you could kind of think of it in the idea of the samurai mentality. So back when we talked about samurai, we talked about the idea of oh, why can't I think of the word when they cut their guts out? Ritual samurai suicide. Someone's probably going to say it in the chat in a minute. I'm drawing a blank on what it's called, but the idea that rather than be beaten in warfare, you'd commit suicide. This was something that the samurai had done historically, and it's seppuku. Yeah, it's seppuku. Thank you. You got me with Sudoku, so I remember what it is. I'm going to type it into the chat so you guys can see that. There you go. Seppuku. It is not Sudoku. Sudoku is those things that Anna likes to do. All right. So, yeah. So it's this idea of seppuku, fighting to the last man, fighting until you die, that is going to be the mentality of the Japanese, and this is one of the reasons why the United States decides to do what they end up doing. So. Back on the home front of the United States, what happens is that FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt, the President of the United States, dies. And when he dies, Harry Truman becomes president. And Truman, upon becoming president, is basically informed very quickly thereafter, hey, we have this secret thing that's been going on called the Manhattan Project, and it's to develop a weapon that will wipe out an entire city. And yeah, you didn't know anything about it, but now that you know this information, would you like to use this weapon? And Truman basically agrees that it will save more American lives to drop the atomic bomb on a Japanese city. Now, there's a lot of debate around whether the United States should or shouldn't have dropped the atomic bomb, and I'm not going to get into all of those debates. I don't think it was 100% clear to everyone what the long-term impacts of using an atomic weapon would be, especially in regards to the fallout zone and the radiation moving away from the target. But needless to say, atomic weapons are extremely scary, and it's a good thing that these are the only two that have ever been dropped on a civilian target. But the first bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. Was it Hiroshima? I think it was Hiroshima. And then the United States government basically waited for surrender. Japan refused to surrender, and so then the United States dropped a second bomb on Nagasaki. After which, the Japanese did surrender, and so this ended the war in the Pacific. The two atomic bombs being dropped. There are a lot of different speculations, even to this day, about the motivations of the different motivations for why the United States might have dropped atomic bombs, other than ending the war. One of the more interesting theories is that the United States did this to not only end the war, but to send a message to Joseph Stalin, who was becoming a problem as the war was winding down. And we're going to be talking about the start of the Cold War very soon. And I'll probably bring this up again when we get to the start of the Cold War. But this is pretty much how the war in the Pacific goes down. I skipped over certain things, like, for instance, Guadalcanal and the Battle of the Coral Sea. But if you're interested in that kind of stuff, you can watch Band of Brothers, or not Band of Brothers, the Pacific one. It's literally called The Pacific. So yeah, if you're into World War II stuff, then I highly recommend it. But anyway, yeah, does anybody have any questions? Any questions at all? Is oversimplified good for a review source? Is that the YouTube channel? Um, Jacob, is that the YouTube channel? Yeah, I think it is. I think I've watched some of that before. I'm pretty sure it's probably a pretty decent review source. Will we have another vocab quiz? Yes, but I have to give you a vocab list before we do another vocab quiz, and I'm going to give you that vocab list at the beginning of next week. How do we turn in the extra credit? I'll probably just create an assignment where you can upload pictures of your extra credit. How long will we have to do the test? An hour. It'll be an hour. Can you go to the bathroom? I mean, that's on you, man. If I turned in my extra credit to your office box at school, am I good? I'm not allowed in the building right now. But yeah, I believe you. And also, Coach Melton caught me when I was lifting weights and was like, Michael Puzio dropped off his extra credit, and then I should have grabbed it on the way out, but I forgot. Do you think we will be out longer than intended? Um, hmm. I think there's a very decent chance that we will be out. Basically, what I'm seeing is that the district is preparing for us to be out for a long time. 8 weeks at least seems legit. Yeah, I have no idea what College Board plans on doing. I'm going to just keep careful with your typing there, Adam. That's a bad typo to make. uh, yeah, I'm thinking that they may try to. I don't know exactly what they're going to do with the AP exam, but I'm going to continue to prep like we're going to be taking the AP exam on the 15th, which is, I believe, the date we're supposed to be taking it. And so, yeah. You're going to rip your hair out. You're already going to say, yeah, I know, right? People complain about school, but being at home all day is boring. Does anybody have any questions historically? Historical questions? Okay, so tomorrow I'm not going to stream on Friday. So tomorrow what I'll do is probably cover the peace negotiations, the start of the UN. And then, was the nuclear last resort? That's actually a fantastic question. Um, um, there are different opinions on the nuke. I mean, soldiers were all set and ready to invade Japan. That's what taking Okinawa was all about. Like, if we were going to just drop the nuke, then we wouldn't have taken Okinawa. Does that make sense? You don't sacrifice hundreds or thousands of lives to take the staging area for an invasion if you don't plan on actually doing that invasion. So, yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I'm not 100% sure on that, but there could be a couple different arguments, historical arguments made about whether or not it was a last resort. So, good question. Who is Paco? I have a guess, but actually I don't know. Who's Paco? Tell me right now. I want to know who Paco is. Oh, it's Jaden. Oh, cool. Jaden, take your quiz. Okay, make sure you do that. Let me see. I'm going to just quickly look through that textbook that I just plugged and see if there's anything specific that I missed. Not really. I actually think I gave probably more details than that. They talk a little bit about Guernica. That's a very famous painting by Pablo Picasso. Oh wait, that was 7.4. Wait, what am I talking? Okay. At this point, if you're watching this video after the fact, you should probably just cut it off. The home front. Yeah, we've covered it. We covered everything we needed to about the actual war. So, anybody else have any questions? All right. Well, then I'm going to end the stream in, well, it's 8:45 right now. So I'm going to end the stream. You need to do your quiz. Is anybody having, actually, real quick, guys, do me a favor. I'm going to quickly, what we're going to do is, if you know phone numbers or contact information for the following students, will you please contact them and tell them, see if they are having any issues logging in, have them email me if they are, because these people need to do their quizzes. So Divya needs to do hers, Olivia Allen, Brianna Anthony, Michael Mancia, Kimball, Yahir, Celine Berry. I think she actually logged in and tried, but something happened. So if someone would check and see if she can. Elijah Black. Adam, you still need to do yours, which you told me you're just now getting on. Antonio Elliott. Al. Al from first period. Garmondia. Treasure. And she was on last night, so she's Christina. No, Christina did hers. Never mind. Tyreek Carey needs to do his. Skylar Jessup. Lou Kamala still needs to do his. Jaden, you need to do yours. Carmela Minervini. Sahel. Tegra. Izzy Smith. Michaela Smith. Kenneth. Sastre Reyes. If anyone has Kenneth's contact information, that would be good because I haven't been able to contact him at all. Sadie Stillman needs to do hers. Alana Thornton needs to do hers. Emma, you need to do yours, and Anna Woods. Emma, I'm sure you can tell Anna to do hers. All right, so if you guys could get in contact with one of those people, that would be fantastic. And Reese, yes, please go to the bathroom. But you're supposed to say, may I go to the bathroom? So I don't know. Can you? There you go. Is that what you were digging for this whole time? Yes, it is on Schoology. That is correct. Are you able to get into Schoology? Kenneth does not own a phone. Okay. All right. Well, I will try to get in contact with his parents. Thank you, Reem. Appreciate it. All right, y'all have a good night, and I will see you mañana. And I will have more beard. Good night.